Hello, Molly. I'm delighted to be chatting with you. Myself and Steve
Hello.
Evans here.
I am so happy to be here talking to you guys.
Hey, hi, Molly. Good to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you from Terry and one thing and another. So, how is life in Philadelphia today?
It's all right. Yeah,
Or is it this morning?
it's about 2:30 here.
Oh,
We've
right.
just kind of been hanging out today. Saturdays are pretty slow. Sundays are a lot busier for us. So, yeah.
Molly,
Okay.
do you need a visit to the dentist with tooth
I'm
hurty?
sorry.
Is tooth very hurty?
Ha,
Oh, stupid. Sorry.
I-
Cut that out.
Terry,
Oh, sorry.
that joke actually just appeared in something that I read recently. I can't recall what it was, but it was absolutely in there.
Sorry.
that's terrible, Terry. I
I
don't
know.
believe you
Apologies. I'll leave the room now.
Yeah.
stooped that low. Oh dear. Anyway, before we talk about your writing, Molly, what do you do? What do you do as hobbies and things like that outside of your writing and Marvel Comics, of course?
Yes. I'm a teacher as my career, and so I spend a lot of time just working on stuff for my teaching job. I teach creative writing, so a lot of my time is spent working like with my students writing. But for fun, I do a lot of theater. And so I direct a play every fall at the high school where I teach, and I perform in a play in the spring. We actually open in just a couple weeks. We are doing 9 to 5, the musical by Dolly Parton. So that's going up soon. And if I'm not, rehearsing for a show in the spring, I'm prepping for my show in the fall. So yeah, that takes up a lot of my time.
And you've got twins as well, haven't you? How about them? Do they take up a bit of time as well?
Yes, that is true. Yes, I have twin 6-year-old boys, and yes, they do. They're very busy and they're very energetic. So yeah.
Yeah, rather you than me.
Oh, Molly, you worked as an editor with Marvel Comics, what, 2004, 2008? How brilliant was that? Tell us about the experience.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So when basically at the end of college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with myself because I had applied to graduate school and not gotten in. And I decided like kind of just to take a leap and try to get into the comic book industry because I was a big fan of comics and I was interested in the industry. And um, it turns out I had some connections within the industry that I hadn't previously known about. And that helped me get interviews at Marvel and DC. And I actually got hired at Marvel without being interviewed by Tom Brevoort, who eventually became my boss. I interviewed with like 5 other people at the company and not him. And then I was hired and they brought me into his office and were just like, here's your new assistant. And he just surprised
Wow.
him. So luckily we got on very well and we're still in touch. No, I learned a ton while I was working there. I was in the Marvel Heroes office. And so I worked on books like Captain America and Iron Man, Avengers, Fantastic Four, which is my favorite.
Brilliant.
And also a lot of the miniseries that are being adapted into movies and TV shows now, like House of M and Civil War and Secret Invasion.
That's super. That's absolutely brilliant. Did you have a favorite comic character? Was this Superwoman? I've read.
So the Fantastic Four were always my favorite.
Yeah.
Starting, back when I was 5 years old and my dad first read me Fantastic Four #5 with Dr. Doom. Um, and when I got back into comics as a college student, I started reading Spider-Man and Fantastic Four again. And so I was really lucky to be able to work on my favorite books with my favorite characters. So I worked on Fantastic Four. I was also the primary editor for Spider-Girl by
Oh,
Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz.
yeah.
So that was a lot of fun as well. And I'm still reading now monthly Fantastic Four and the Captain America books.
That's superb.
That's absolutely amazing stuff, isn't it? That's great. Yeah. Just looking at your website the other day, you've got an excellent site.
Thank you.
And you've mentioned already that you're a fan from an early age of comic books anyway. But do you think the blockbuster Hollywood adaptations of Marvel heroes has encouraged a big growth in in comic books generally?
Yeah, I do. I think that it brought me back to reading comics on a monthly basis. I think I talked about it on, you mentioned my website, that it was after the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire that I started reading comics again. And I know there were other people like me. And I think that today it brings interest to the characters, especially when there are storylines from the comics that are being adapted into film. And I know usually when that happens, the Marvel and DC both will put out reissues of like trade paperbacks or hardback graphic novels that contain those storylines, and sometimes try to put elements from the films into the comics that are coming out right now. And I just think there's been a huge growth in interest in both comic books and graphic novels, especially among teenagers. In my classroom library, I have a whole section of graphic novels, and it's often the first thing that my students will go to. And they're not even all superhero graphic novels. I have many different genres in there, and they really gravitate towards it. I don't blame them.
Okay. Your two books, Owl Eyes, a fairy tale, and Lentils and Black Rice, and plus the genre of your short stories, well, as it says on the tin on your website, they're all fairy tales. With your Marvel background, I'm surprised that your own writing isn't focused on superheroes.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just never went in that direction with my own work. My two kind of, I don't know, I guess you would say like myth and modern myth influences were fairy tales and mythology, and then superheroes. But with my work, I went in the superhero direction, and with my own writing, it's always been fairy tales that have interested me. And I did, do a lot of reading of the older versions of fairy tales, the Grimm versions, Charles Perrault, Hans Christian Andersen, and other variants from different cultures. Even as a high schooler, I was reading those. And then in college, I took a course on feminist fairy tales where we read both classic versions and modern adaptations of fairy tales and talked a lot about those. And my writing spun out of a lot of that.
So moving on to your two books, because we've just been talking about them, are they standalone books? Are they going to be part of a whole series or trilogies, and what age are they? What age range are they aimed at?
Yeah, so they are meant to be standalone pieces. Owl Eyes is a novel. It's set in a world called Calendaria, in which I have other ideas for stories. In fact, Lentils and Black Rice is a short story collection, and there are two stories in that book that take place in the world of Owl Eyes. But Owl Eyes is the only novel length story that kind of I've gotten me for that in that universe. And then when I started writing it, I didn't really have an age range in mind.
Okay.
I just wanted to tell this story. And I kept saying, oh, I'm writing it for whoever wants to read it, regardless of their age. But when it comes to publishing, that's not how publishing works. And so if a book has a teenage character, it often immediately gets marketed as YA. Not always, but often. And so I thought that, the best way to try to get it published was to appeal to agents specializing in YA and publishers specializing in YA. And it does fit a lot of the themes of young adult literature these days. So it did end up working out that way.
Okay, fair enough. So are there any dark themes in it then? And are they pitched at that level, or are they pitched at older?
Yes. Originally I wrote the very first draft of it when I was a senior in college. And I funneled a lot of my early 20s angst into it. So it got pretty dark. And as I grew older, because I started writing it in 2003, and then it didn't get published until 2018. So it was like a 14-year journey.
Wow.
From the first draft to the last draft. And but I think the book matured as I matured, but the darkness absolutely remained there.
Yeah.
So yeah, just themes about like identity and figuring out who you are and what does that mean when you don't really like who you are, and dealing with family and connecting with who your family is, and what happens when who your family is not who you want them to be. All kind of played into the book, but I also leaned into some of the darker elements of the Grimm's fairy tales, especially, the Grimm's fairy tales in which the stepsisters cut off parts of their feet and get their eyes pecked out. That really appeals to me.
Lovely, lovely.
That doesn't happen in Owl Eyes, but there were a lot of kind of those darker Grimm type fairy tales were a huge influence on me and my writing, and that extends into the short stories in Lentil and Black Rice, which are definitely aimed at a more adult audience.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Just looking at the original telling, as you mentioned, the fairy tales was certainly darker than that portrayed in the cuddly Disney films. The Brothers Grimm, writing around about 1815 time, I think they originally wrote the stories for adults, but when sales were low, they sort of toned them down to appeal to children. And you got people like psychologists Bruno Bettelheim saying that the creepy stuff helps children to grow emotionally by allowing them to grapple with fears that are part of growing up. And as you mentioned, I think the original telling of the Snow White tale, it's got the Queen sending the huntsman not just to bring back Snow White's heart, but to bring her heart and her lungs, bring them back in a box for me.
Yeah. Go ahead. I have Bettelheim's books downstairs and other analysis by Jack Zipes. I've read all of that, and I find it fascinating. I think sometimes Bruno Bettelheim takes things a step too far when he gets into the really Freudian parts of his analysis, but it does make sense. A lot of the things he says, especially about why it's always a stepmother and not the fairy tale child's actual mother, because it's easier for a child to project those negative feelings about a mother figure onto someone who's slightly removed, as opposed to someone who's directly identified as the character's mother. I thought that was really interesting because it is always a step parent. In like Hansel and Gretel, it's the mother's died, the father has remarried, and by the end, Hansel and Gretel come back from their experience with the witch, who's really strongly connected with the stepmother and may, in some interpretations, be the same character. Hansel and Gretel come back, and she's just randomly dead. She's gone. Their problem is solved. So I don't know. I just think it's all really interesting, and the darkness makes it kind of more interesting to me than those sanitized Disney versions.
I think in a way it adds reassurance to the children, knowing that their natural parents, will look after them. Usually they end up, as a happy ending, usually in the modern telling of the tales. And it gives the kids that bit of confidence to sort of grow up by themselves to a certain extent.
Yeah, I agree.
You're lucky enough to connect with a publisher, Fire and Ice, Molly. So a lot of people we speak to really struggle with publishers and end up, publishing themselves for whatever reason. So how did you connect with those? And was it an easy process, or did you find it really difficult?
So I had been querying for about a year already at that point. I initially started querying literary agents, and oh God, I must have sent out like 80 queries. And I had a giant spreadsheet. I mean, a lot of it, there were a lot of dead letters. There were a bunch of, just flat out rejections. There were a few agents who asked for partial or whole copies of the manuscript, which was always very exciting. But ultimately that didn't work out. And then I started querying independent publishers, and I found Fire and Ice in a search for independent publishers, and they were open for submissions. And so I sent my query off, and Caroline Andrus, who is the head of Fire and Ice, she said, yes, I'd like to read your book. And I sent it off to her, and it actually happened pretty fast. It was within like 2 weeks or so after I sent her the manuscript that she said, yes, we'd like to publish this. And Fire and Ice is It's like a subset of Melange Books, which publishes a wide variety of genres. So Fire and Ice is their YA imprint, and they also have Satin Romance, which is their romance imprint. And so the whole thing is headed up by Nancy Schumacher, and then Caroline is her daughter. And so they are a two-person team who also has some other people on their editorial staff, and Caroline does all the design and is pretty terrific at it. So they were a really good bunch of people to be working with.
Molly, going off on a sidetrack slightly, but your Owl Eyes book, it's featured on our friend Michelle Cobbett's literary ride website, review website. Have you connected with Michelle?
Yeah, so actually she entered a giveaway that I did on Twitter for where you could have chosen either Owl Eyes or Lentils and Black Rice, and she was one of the people who won the giveaway, and I sent her Owl Eyes, and that's how that all started.
Yeah.
So she read it and liked it, and she's been such a great promoter, and she's really amazing for authors and just spreading awareness of books and of just people's presence on social media.
We're sort of working together with Michelle. She sort of, we interview maybe once a month. She talks about the new writers that she's going to be reviewing. And most of the time we'll get in touch like we've done with your good self, sort of, combine all the three of us together.
Yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Your sort of the highest aspiration, is it to get your work out on the big screen?
Think so. I don't think that's a realistic goal for me.
It's there though, it's an option.
Could
happen.
Would it be great? Sure. I mean, when I originally conceived of the ending of Owl Eyes, I had the whole like how it would, the cinematography for it, and like where the camera would be panning, the song would be playing in the background, and I had it all planned out. But I don't think it's a realistic goal, and that's okay. I mean, I had this story in me for a really long time, and I wanted to get it out into the world, and it's out there now. So I'm very happy with it being out there in book form.
Okay. It's like they say about doing the lottery here in the UK. You're not going to win it unless you buy a ticket. So, you bought your ticket, you're in there. And that's how 99% of films and television gets made, based from, the novel, the story.
No, that's very true. I also think there are a lot of, I mean, Owl Eyes is a Cinderella adaptation, and there's just a ton of Cinderella adaptations out there. And, I tried to make mine as unique as I could. And I feel that it's, this is my version. This is my telling of it. But like, is it likely that out of all the thousands of versions that it's going to be made into a film or TV show? Probably not, and that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Okay, just thinking of the lottery advertisements again. That their slogan is like a giant finger pointing down, saying "This could be you."
Yeah, you received an award back in 2016, didn't you, from a college? Was that for creative writing? What was that? An MFA, is it?
Oh yeah, no, that was my my second master's degree. So yes, I spent from 2011 to 2015. I finished my master's in fine arts and creative writing.
Ah, right, yeah.
And Owl Eyes, the basically final draft of Owl Eyes was my MFA thesis. So it started as an independent study in college, got rewritten a whole bunch of times in between. I rewrote it before starting my MFA thesis semester, which I did with my thesis advisor, Carmen Maria Machado, who wrote Her Body and Other Parties, which was, I believe, on the short list for the National Book Prize in the United States. And I gave it to Carmen. I said, "Oh, it's wonderful. Here is my thesis that I just rewrote." And she read it and she was like, "Okay, you need to rewrite it." And that was devastating because I had just rewritten the entire thing, but she was right. She was right. Everything she said about it was right. And so over the next 6 months, I rewrote it again. And it was so much better. Taking her feedback, and I solved a problem that had plagued the ending of the book since the very beginning of the book in that last draft, and ultimately it's the version that got published.
So what do you reckon is coming up next for you in the next few years? Then, I mean, you're obviously thinking ahead, aren't you? So, where are you going to go? What direction? Or are you going to stay with the same?
Yeah, I think my ideas kind of remain in the fairy tale world. I have another story that I've written that I do want to go back and revise. It's not in the fairy tale world, although it's kind of more based around pop culture and technology, and a lot of the terms that were around when I wrote it are now out of date, and so I'd have to go back and revise. And then I have some other fairy tale ideas that at some point I'd like to get down on the page. I actually just assigned my creative writing students their own fairy tale that they need to fracture, and it's actually due next week. And I told them, I'm actually going to try to do this assignment with you guys this year because I have an idea. And so I do intend to try to write a story along with them, and then we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, I just wondered whether you're still, I know you said you were still in touch with the Marvel Comics guys and all that. I just wondered whether you were going to head back into something on that line.
So I actually work super part-time for Comics Connection, which is a company where aspiring comic book writers and artists and just people who are interested in the industry can take classes and get feedback on their scripts and their art. And so I am one of their professional writing critiquers. And so I will give feedback on scripts that amateur comic book writers submit. And actually, I've seen a number of the scripts that I've given feedback on then published, which is really cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's superb.
Excellent stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have a favourite children's fairy tale? I know my own kids and my granddaughters, they love Morris Sendag's Where the Wild Things Are.
Mm-hmm.
So wait, favorite?
Are you asking about like classic fairy tales or just modern children's lit?
Whatever's your favorite.
So fairy tales, obviously Cinderella, but like these days I lean more towards the darker fairy tales like the Juniper Tree or Bluebeard. Right now I'm reading a lot of stuff with my 6-year-olds.
Of course.
We're in the middle of Jeff Smith's graphic novel series Bone, which I think is brilliant. And I actually hadn't read it before reading it with them, and they're super into it. It's high fantasy, and it's just a really exciting book with really great characters. So we're really enjoying that right now.
Okay.
Any aspirations for your children then to become on and be writers, or like you? Or
oh, that would be great. I don't know. I mean, they're 6 at this point, so
I know 6. I know.
Right, getting them to write a couple sentences takes a while.
I was brought up reading the Marvel comics, reading about the Fantastic Four and the Adventures of Thor. That taught me how to read as a child. I was buying them my parents were buying them for me as a 5-year-old. I'm struggling to read with them, but they did sort of increase my literacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And comic books and graphic novels are great for that. I mean, me too. When I was 5 was when my dad started reading comics to me. And from the ages of 5 to 8, I was totally obsessed with them. But it actually takes a special skill set kind of like in the brain to read comic books. So you're not just reading the words, you have to process words with pictures and what do I look at now and what do I read next. And it's a skill set you have to develop. Because there are adults you can give a graphic novel to and they don't know what to do with it because they don't know where to look. So it absolutely helps encourage, I think, readers of all levels to engage with writing.
You know what? I'd never even thought about it like that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think Iceman was my favourite. I used to collect the all the cushions off the settee, off the 3-piece, and put them down the stairs and slide down the stairs as though I was Iceman, spraying the ice in front of me, sliding down.
That's so fun.
I was only 32 as well.
This imagination's running away with you, Terry. These comics have done you a world of good.
Yeah, I used to pretend that I was involved with the Fantastic Four, but I was never, for some reason, as a child, I was never in the Fantastic Four. Like I would imagine that I was Johnny's girlfriend or I was Ben's girlfriend, but I was never like, I didn't imagine myself as a superhero, which is strange.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
kind of looking back as an adult, like I guess I didn't see myself in like I guess I didn't see myself as being a superhero, but I wanted to be in their world. And I think that even like today, there's way more representation of all different types of
True.
people. And so more people can see themselves
Yeah.
in superheroes, which is better.
Well, in a way, that manifested itself. You became part of creating the superheroes rather than being one of the superheroes.
That
So,
is
like,
true.
in a way, like a sort of a maternal figure of the superheroes.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah. What about what advice would you give to a would-be writer? I'm not suggesting your children, but a would-be writer who wants to write a book for the first time. What's your advice?
Yeah, well, this is advice I give to my students all the time, is that, and it's advice I have to remember myself, is that it doesn't have to be good. It just has to be done. That whole idea of getting out your terrible rough draft, and not really worrying about like whether it's like brilliant publishable quality writing. It just has to be on the page, because once you've written it down, then you can fix it. Right? You can't fix it until you've written it the first time, and maybe a second time, and then a third time. But remembering that it is a process, and that like just get that bad first draft out. And I think that's important to remember. It's something I have to keep reminding myself when I'm really worried about, oh, this writing is terrible. But that's okay, because it can be fixed.
Okay, so does it have to be a beginning, middle, and end, or do you have a let's write the end bit first and then track back? Or
so for me personally, I tend to write linearly, but I think whatever works best for you. Like if you have an idea for, a perfect idea for how that last scene and what you want to look at, what you want it to look like, get it down on the page. I've come up with, like, for the story that I'm thinking about writing now, at some point a couple nights ago, I came up with what I would like the ending to be, like word for word, and then I didn't write it down and I've forgotten it.
Ah.
So of course it was probably like midnight when I came up with it. It is at midnight, and if you don't have a piece of paper next to your desk, so have a piece of paper next to your bed. But no, if it benefits the writing process to write out of order, yeah, go ahead.
I'm glad you mentioned that piece of paper next to your desk, because I sometimes wake up in the night with a thought, and if I haven't got anything to write it down on, I panic because I know I'll forget by the morning.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I've heard some other writers say they keep a phone by the bed so they speak the idea in, to message to themselves.
I was actually doing Post-its by my bed before I had a cell phone. I got a cell phone pretty late in life, more later than most people I know. And I do remember like scribbling stuff down on Post-its that I would just then writing in the dark, and then looking at it the next morning and being like, what? But I was able to decipher enough of it that I could then transfer it into my manuscript.
Okay.
Cool.
I've really enjoyed it. So let's maybe have a chat up with the next release of the next book.
Yes, if there is one. Yes.
Okay.
If there is one.
I'll try and get the times right as well.
Yes.
It'll be a first for me.
This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. But for now, Molly, thanks very much.
Thank you as well.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.